Okay. Hi, welcome to Salt and Honey. Today, I'm Leslie and this is Sloane. And today we're
Hi.
talking with Yuko Ota and Ananth Hirsh, the
Hi.
cartoonist and writer duo that you probably know from Johnny Wander. But today we're going to be talking about their new book, Pixels of You, which is illustrated by J.R. Doyle.
Yes. Me
Yeah.
and Leslie are longtime Johnny Wander fans, and we
Mhm.
especially like this comic, so we're very excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to those.
Yes. I guess to start us off, do you want to give us like a little like summary of what the story is about for people who are looking forward to reading it but aren't, that want to know what it's about basically?
Yeah. You wanna?
I'll start and I'll pass
Yeah,
it to you. So Pixels of You it's like a soft sci-fi near future story. At its core, it's about two girls who are interning at a like a photography studio, and one of them is Indian American and one of them is a an AI with a realistic chassis that presents as like a white girl. And it's basically about them meeting for the first time, absolutely hating each other's guts, and then having to do a project together and the relationship that they form over time.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the foreground, and then the background is a lot of like kind of gets into AI lightly, I think. So yeah, I think that's good. Good job.
Nice. Perfect. Well done. It's always hard to summarize up stories like that. So yeah.
Yeah.
Leslie, as always, interrupt me. I have some questions, but
Yeah, go
you know
ahead.
me. Okay, so the first thing, of course, I kind of want to ask is just how like this story came to fruition for you. Like, what was the germ for it? Maybe what did you initially want to explore with it, and then how did that kind of change over the course of the development of it?
Okay. Yuko, you said we're chatting earlier, and you said something about how most of our stories have to do with a particular. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
You mean like where it's like characters first and foremost,
Yeah.
and we're less interested in presenting like world building up front. We like to show how the world has affected the characters, and we keep the camera on the characters, and you get to see how the world has like molded and shaped the have been molded and shaped by the world that they live in.
Yeah. So that helps to explain like I think originally we chatted about this concept, but mostly I like went into my like hole and wrote about it for a while. It started off with the character, like the characters were in the front. I really had wanted for a long time to do a story about two people who like hate each other's guts and then have to kind of like work through it and get over it. And the conclusion is that they sort of like find friendship within the friction. So like it's very interested in depicting a relationship where like the like you don't see the friction go away, but the two characters sort of maybe come to some sort of understanding with one another. That was where it started. We also knew that we wanted to do a story with like an Indian American protagonist, at least one of the most frontward characters. So that was also kind of set. It kind of started with writing. It was like a very dreamy, I had a very dreamy sense of kind of like what it might be. And so I just started writing like little scenes and stuff with these two characters. And as those developed, I started to get a sense of like, I think that this character is, I think this other character, so Indra was Indian from the beginning. I think this other character, Fawn, is probably white, but also there's something sort of like ethereal or otherworldly about her. And we kind of like went back and talked again and decided that we've done like our other projects largely seem to be focused on fantasy. And so I kind of wanted to put that aside and try something different. And so I thought to myself, okay, well, what if she was an android? Like I read a lot of science fiction growing up, and it's something that we have always like tried to take a crack at here and there, like when we're putting together pitches or whatever, but
and none of them have ever panned out.
Yeah.
We keep on putting together stories that are kind of like in a soft sci-fi setting, and none of them have like kind of come to fruition except for this one.
Yeah. Yeah, and so from there, I said to myself, okay, she's an android. You know, like maybe I should think about artificial intelligence. My brother actually is a programmer in California, and he had worked a little bit on like aspects of artificial intelligence. So I was able to like call him and have these long conversations, and he kind of walked me through some of the things that they were doing out there in terms of like the real world. And then from there, he gave me a springboard to do some research, where I found that a lot of the stuff that I was reading sort of like shored up or was parallel with my ideas about some of the characters. Also, you know, I'm sure we'll get into this later maybe, but like I also found that artificial intelligence is like on the one hand really cool, like it can do some amazing things, and on the other hand it's like pretty scary, you know, and pretty unregulated, and that I think that also helped to inform certain parts of the story as well. So I think up to that point I ended up writing a draft that was probably like 60 to 80 pages or something, and then
Yeah, and then
you
I
started-
tagged in, and then we started kind of like building on it more together, which is basically usually the way that we collaborate together. Like usually I'm just like the way that I contribute to writing is basically I like Ananth will share just like a block of writing, and then I go to it with like a hammer and chisel.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, so you did end up writing some of the scenes and stuff, but you're like a really, I think you called yourself like a super involved editor, and I would take it a step further than that. I think what you do is like what you do in there is like also writing, but yeah, our writing relationship tends to be that I give something to Yuko and she's like, oh, I hate this, you know. And then I'm like, oh, okay, well, describe to me like why you hate it, like what's the problem here, and I'll make notes and I'll go back, and usually it's like that, but in this case, Yuko was able to just kind of like get in there and do kind of what you felt made sense, and we have like conversations about it and stuff. But yeah, and then at some point an agent got involved and was like, you can't sell a book that's like 80 pages, no one's gonna buy that.
Please make it twice as long. We're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and we're like, oh, all right, cool. And so
so yeah, then we made it twice as long, and then we found a publisher that was interested, and they were like, the characters are too old, please make them YA age. And we're like, okay, so then we rewrote it again. This book has had many different incarnations.
Oh wow,
yeah,
interesting.
they're originally like college age, I think.
Yeah, and now they're amorphous age.
And then yeah, I think at that point it went to like pitching, and then JR got involved, and I think from there, man, I feel like I'm going on about this.
No, it's great. There's like so many tidbits that I'm gonna circle back to. So, but like, please, I don't want to stop you.
Okay. Once JR got involved, like I originally was writing for Yuko, but usually when I write something, I write to what I think are the strengths and interests of like the person I'm working with.
Mhm.
And so, why am I gesturing? You're over here. His camera messes me up.
Yeah.
So basically, yeah, I wrote it sort of thinking about it in Yuko's hand. And we wanted to find a collaborator who, when it became clear that Yuko wouldn't be able to draw it, we wanted to find a collaborator who sort of like understood how to like do emotive drawing. And I find Jen and Yuko's, I said this earlier to Yuko, but I find Jen and Yuko's art styles to be like emotive, but like like if it's a Venn diagram, they like overlap a little bit in the middle, but the spectrum of emotions that each of them is able to kind of express is sort of like in a slightly different direction, I think. And so after Jen agreed to sign on, we actually did a big pass going back through it where
another pass.
we changed a lot of like the dialogue and the screen direction and stuff to what felt like it suited Jen more. One of the other things we did was, this also came with expanding the page count, but we tried to make scenes breathe a lot more because Jen's art tends to be like really atmospheric, you know, and says a lot with very little, I think, in terms of actually speaking.
Yeah, and we added in a couple more horror elements because that's also kind of, it's one of their strengths.
Yeah. Yeah, and then from there, I definitely want to mention this. Like, I think that once an artist gets involved, to me, they're as much an author as I know that for the purposes of like plugging ourselves into the industry that we're working in, we got to say writer, artist, like that. But
yeah,
I definitely do think of Jen and Yuko or whoever I work with, like as much of an author as, you know, like me when I was writing it, you know, sometimes more so because the pictures really change how you tell the story. And a lot of times if the pictures are so expressive that they get something across, you can, you know, cut a lot of the writing out of it and let the art express itself. So yeah. But yeah, I think that's
awesome.
Anything you add. Kind of going on for a while. So.
we had this long conversation this morning trying to remember the order of operations of how the book got made and like the seed where it came from and the trajectory it went from there. So that was more or less a truncated version of us trying to remember how it went, because I mean this has been years that we've been working on this book.
I think the genesis of the book, like the first pass probably was like in 2014 maybe.
Oh, okay.
You know, so yeah, there's a lot to remember. Yeah,
I know. Yeah, it's always hard doing these interviews and then returning to that time when you're like basically a different type of artist and person and having to like kind of inhabit that mindset again. Yeah,
you have to like revisit like the whole process where you kind of don't really remember because you're just kind of doing it as you go.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like really it's a lot to remember, I think. Yeah.
Well, that's like fascinating. So there's a couple points I want to go back to, but I guess I'm also curious about if you want to talk more about your collaborative writing / editing process. Like, are you scripting? Are you writing in prose? Do you do like exploratory writing work, or do you know, how like ordered is your writing process, I guess?
I mean, I would say that your scripting process is extremely ordered compared to where it was when we first started out.
I think when we get to the point of scripting, it usually is pretty ordered, but that's because of the tools that I ended up, like I use Scrivener a lot, and Scrivener really helped inform structure for me in a way that I find helpful, because I think that if I try to like free form something like on paper or just like writing into a doc, I think it just gets a little chaotic for me. I have a hard time keeping things organized. But I would say the genesis of most projects is that we have a long conversation and we develop a concept, I would say over a long period of time, sometimes like a year, sometimes 6 months, sometimes a year, but we talk about it for a long time. But it's like in passing conversations, you know, so like we're walking somewhere or we're not like working, you know, because I find that for me, I think for both of us, but for me, like the really conceptual part of coming up with this kind of stuff is a lot easier when you're not thinking of it as work necessarily.
Yeah.
As soon as it feels like work, my brain tends to just shut down. So and
we live together, and also we've been stuck inside for 2 years. So all we have to do anymore is just hang out and talk.
Yeah.
It's like a Brooklyn apartment, and it's not very big. So we have one office, and we work like 3 feet away from each other. So we can't escape each
other. Yeah. So once we like lock down a concept, I feel like then I usually walk away and write up an outline. And then I bring the outline to Yuko. and Yuko does the thing where she's like, no, no, no. And then, we talk through it and punch it up. And then I go and I write like a loose draft of a script. There was that one tweet that was circulating around about the Simpsons guy who like just writes something through to the end.
As quickly as possible.
As quickly as possible. And if you can't think of dialogue, he's like, joke here or whatever. And I can't do that. Like that is like, I can't do that. Like I have to at least have something substantive down. But they tend to be pretty loose these days. Then we'll go back, make sure that the vibe is right. So there's a lot of like checking with Yuko and then going back and then checking with Yuko and going back. And it usually develops over a long period like that.
Yeah, I mean, even like our main project together that I draw is Barbarous, which you can read at johnnywander.com. And like the scripts for that they go through so many revisions, just so many versions. I'm sure that everything that we do is just like overly time consuming, but we're just always like taking a machete to our scripts and then like pasting stuff in and then taking a machete to that and pasting more stuff in.
Yeah.
It's probably extremely counterproductive.
Yeah, nothing's really ever like done, I think, for us. Until we have to be like, all right, it's going to the printer. We just have to let go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's totally how I feel sometimes too. Like a lot of work, you never really finish it. You just kind of have to like abandon it. Like that's basically it. And then you have to like, and then usually your attention or like your heart is taken up by like a new project. But yeah, I feel like it's kind of endlessly, projects are something you can noodle on forever and perfect as you like grow as like a artist, as a person and all that. Yeah,
I feel like a lot of the time I have to have like a good amount of time between looking at finished pages like as I'm doing them and then revisiting them again, because otherwise I'll just be like, there's so much wrong here, like I can't really look at this objectively at all. So it's really interesting. I feel like that's pretty common.
So you find that like you really need like time away is like part of your process.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I have like, it's like eventually I'll just have to let someone else work on it. And then if I don't like it, then that's that. But it's always really
I think Leslie, you're a bit more of a perfectionist than me. I'm pretty disloyal to my projects, and I'm like, like I'm like,
you're
not
like,
that I don't like them, but like as soon as I'm done with them, like I'm like, oh yeah, this is like
out of mind.
Yeah. Or like I just like, I don't know, respect it on its own terms. Like, okay, this is what I was capable of at the time. And so it's like almost like I'm looking at a different person and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, not bad. I mean, it could be better, but happy it happened.
Yeah. Like I think the more that you do it, the more it's just like, well, no turning back now. It's already out there. Like it's already like a thing that exists.
For better or for worse.
Yeah.
I think I will kind of want to get now into the story, if that's cool, because I really like this. I like the balance, like you're talking about how this is kind of like soft sci-fi, how it's really like character focused, and you kind of touch on world building only as it relates to the characters, which is something I'm a huge fan of. I'm not like, I don't know, world building can be fun, but I find it quite distracting a lot of the times. Like, I don't know. I found it very balanced. So I really like that. I guess.
Yay.
It's really nice to hear.
But yeah, I want to hear more about like, well, first, I really love that first you foregrounded, this like android character who's like created by an AI created by other AIs. And that she chose like a white body. And and you have these sort of like black insert pages that talk about like kind of like tech headlines about the state of AI, and race as like an obvious element to that, of like not of like a lot of AI not recognizing like people of color's faces, like how it's just like a totally warped and white view of, I don't know, just how AI perceive people as incredibly basically racist because of the creators. So I really like that element. I thought it was like really subtle, but it was like the presence of that was there. And then especially just choosing Indira as the other like co-protagonist was really great too. And I think she has like a quiet sort of like awareness of their dynamic, though it's never like outrightly stated. But I thought that was also a nice like low simmering tension. But yeah, I would love to know more kind of about that dynamic of like, because I feel like in sci-fi a lot of times people, especially dealing with like AI or robots, they kind of want like a clean metaphor with them about like how AI and robots are like non-human and they're the like true like victims, or like they're, you know, we need to learn how to see androids as people or AI as like, you know, the evolved humanity or whatever. But then that kind of leaves out all these like racial and class dynamics. And so yeah, I just would love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah. So that was go ahead.
I mean,
sorry,
this is a conversation that we have a lot in terms of science fiction, but also fantasy, where people are like, well, I want to talk about racism, but in a super pulled back way, where I'm talking about orcs, and I'm talking about racism against orcs. And like this is something that we like when doing like sci-fi fantasy stuff in like Pixels of You and in Barbarous, where there are characters who are kind of like inhuman. We absolutely feel very strongly that we don't want to code them to specific like races, genders, ethnicities. It's like not, this is like,
like there's no this equals this, right? Like I think it kind of happens in here because Fawn presents as like a white person, but I think the idea was to like present that as like a messy idea. Yeah, completely. It's like the X-Men thing, right? Like X-Men doesn't really work as a metaphor for what it's like meant to be for, I think. That doesn't mean it can't be like fun or whatever, but I just feel very aware of that as a person who's like frustrated by it, I think. I'm glad the messiness comes across. It was supposed to be pretty like, I wanted to acknowledge reality, kind of like the version of reality that I guess we collectively sort of like saw, but like in a way that didn't have any easy answers. I think one thing that I was pretty obsessed with at that time was depicting like microaggressions in a way that were like clear enough to read off the page, but maybe subtle enough that you were not like verbalizing them, you know? And it also could be a situation where one person reading the book completely goes by it because they don't understand. Another person reading the book looks at it and says, oh yeah, I understand what that experience is like. So I think we were also making like pretty deliberate choices about like how obvious we wanted to be with that stuff.
Like who your implied reader is. Like you're kind of writing for someone who has a more sophisticated sense of like racial and class dynamics that could pick up on that for sure.
I hope that, you know, someone who reads this who maybe doesn't pick up on it in their own life maybe might read this and say, oh, okay, and maybe walk away with it. But also I gotta say, like, personally, like my ethos is like, that's not my job, you know? Like, like I'm way more interested in presenting an experience and sort of like being honest with that, I guess.
Totally. Instead of being like didactic and giving like really basic, transparent examples of like, this is what a microaggression is. This is what it feels like to be like, to feel that sort of racial tension. Like, that's like very boring.
Yeah, totally. And also not, I don't find it effective or effective. I don't find it effective in the sense of like, this conversation's not happening in real life, you know? And so a lot of times when I read something like that, I don't really
Yeah,
walk
like
away
the
feeling.
narrative freezes and turns to the camera and tells you what the moral of the moment is. That's like completely
Yeah.
like breaks the illusion of the story. And I think that like writing a story that's effectively for like adults or people on the cusp of adulthood, like I'm not interested in outright telling the audience what the moral is. You gotta work for that.
Yeah, and no neat and clean solutions either. Like I think we mentioned this earlier, but like I just really like the idea of in this story in particular, but I think it seeped into some of my thinking more generally. I like the idea of depicting characters who maybe have differences, and then it's not like they get over those differences necessarily, but they find a way to deal with them, or they find other things about the relationship that's like sort of like fulfilling for them. And yeah,
And like finding a push and pull where
Yeah.
people are like able, like on both sides are able to concede things.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's just kind of where this was also all written pre like I think a lot of the racial I mean the race conversation in America has like amplified to a point
Yeah.
compared to like 2014 or earlier maybe,
Oh man.
where
Yeah.
it wasn't there. So I think the book luckily landed in a time with like more awareness of these things. But it wasn't, I guess, conceived of
Yeah,
in that
like
time. Yeah.
like a lot of this book came from an extremely therapeutic space because stuff like this wasn't being talked about when the first versions of the script, the first iterations of the script were being written. Because like if we had tried to sell this script back when it was first written, it would be completely unsellable. And I'm very grateful that there is now, if like not a discussion, like a acknowledgement that I don't know, like microaggressions exist, people of different races exist. You can have a protagonist that's not white, that's not a man, that's not straight.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like I just find how you've handled it like very sophisticated, and again like very narratively well crafted. Again, just it's very well done.
Thank you. I think a lot of that credit goes to J.R. Doyle too. Their illustrations, I think, really, like they really got like some of the nonverbal situations and some of the tensions, and I think that they're able to put those on the page in a way that it felt honest to me when I first saw the pages come in. I was like, oh yeah, they totally get it. So
yeah.
I think that for me, like one of the things that sticks out about the book is that I just feel, well, it's first of all, I think it's really balanced as well. I feel like it's easy to read, not in a bad way, and it flows well. But also, like I feel like the last Android-related media that I kind of remember consuming was like, I don't know, Detroit Become Human, and I like hated it. So I was like, this is like the least subtle, like Sloane made me play it, and I was like, this is like legitimately like really bad, like not even like offensive, it's just really stupid. And then like to read this, I was like, this is like the complete opposite of that. So
oh my god.
I mean, so that's just kind of my thought.
I never put that together. Oh my god.
Oh,
it's like
so
it's
good.
like it's like this
so
is like
funny.
it's almost like it like came from like the same germ in like your heads and like David Cage's head, but like you guys just took it in completely different directions. Like this is like subtle and like artsy and like kind of thoughtful, and then that is just like really heavy-handed and kind of
oh my god,
crazy. But yeah, sorry, I had to say that.
I like, part of me kind of wants to go watch a let's play of it now.
You should watch it. It's you should.
I've heard
you have to now. You have to now.
I feel like I do.
I've seen some super cuts, and it's
rough. It's really rough.
There's also an
But-
artist robot, so
Yeah.
some commonalities
It's
there.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
I'm so glad
main robot is like the artist robot.
Like the guy, the one with the I think he
Mhm.
doesn't have like a little thing here or something.
I
They
think
all have like a little
They
thing.
all have
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I don't know that much about it, but I'm so glad we're on camera so you can see the faces we're making.
I was like, should I mention this? I don't know. Like,
Oh no,
kind
that's great.
of-
Yeah.
It makes me feel really good. So, thank you.
No,
That's
I mean,
great.
like,
Yeah, that's
I
a
wish
full
more
photo.
stuff was like that. I wish more stuff was like this. I mean, not like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
That was
I,
better than David Cage.
Yeah.
Better, smarter than David Cage.
Something we can all aspire to. Yeah.
Low bar, real low bar.
Low bar.
Oh my god, that's so funny. I totally forgot about it.
Really important.
That brought me lots
I'm gonna
of
think
joy.
about that like for the rest of the
Oh my
conversation.
gosh.
Yeah.
So funny. Let's see, what else do I want to ask about? Oh, I guess I kind of wanted to ask about the choice to make them photographers. I really like that. I feel like that kind of foregrounds the sense of like spectatorship, of like the burdens of like being beheld, of being like an object to other people, like and also just a sense of like the performance of self. So I really like that element. Yeah, what was
Oh, you're
behind
so smart. I can't believe this stuff.
but yeah, I would love to hear you talk about the choice about that and like integrating photography into this narrative.
Yeah. Do you want to?
I mean,
I feel like I've been blabbing. so-
yeah, but you're
I'll
like
jump in after.
I think that like even from the opening scene, there's this like reoccurring theme with Indra where she wants to take photos of like white women, where like within the first like I don't know, like 5 or 10 pages, she's taken photos of like 5 different white women.
Yeah.
And none of the people she ever photographs ever look like her. And I think that like the theme of perceiving versus being perceived is like really important, especially when you find out at the end what her history is of like being perceived or not. I think that is like really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Should I jump in?
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's like seeing and being seen. Photography is like kind of, I think after comics became like a job, photography, like I reached a point like years ago, but I was like, I have to do something that's like not comics, but is creative and in my free time. And so I picked up photography, and I'm like a super amateur photographer, but sometimes I do like headshots for friends and stuff. But so that was kind of like in the background, and it kind of put it in my head. I was like, I'm interested about like people who take pictures and like what motivates them, I guess. The subjects that they choose, and then also like cameras get used in different ways, like we can use a camera artistically, but also camera can be used for surveillance. Camera can be used, like there's like traffic camera. I guess that's essentially surveillance. So there's like that aspect of it. Oh my god, I totally lost my train of thought here. Oh my god.
It's okay.
You're gonna jump in while I talk.
I got
You got
no
nothing. You got
thoughts.
nothing.
No, it's
Yeah.
okay. I have more
I-
questions about this. Like, I also liked how they each kind of had, well, their art shows. So we have Indira's, her first show we see is like images of androids and like old style androids. So they're kind of like they're not trying to pass as human, which I really liked. I felt like, oh, okay, this is someone who feels like maybe a little bit alienated with themselves and is connecting with that like in sense of inhumanity. and that style of robot. And then I really liked, Fawn's, really trying to integrate organic forms into her art. And I also like Fawn's, I feel like there was a tension there of like trying to pass for human, but also realizing like her entire, like she's not gonna die and she's gonna live probably past humanity, and what does that mean for her identity as a person? Like, why does she have to, basically she has to like role play a human, even though this really has this is not going to be of any consequence to her in like the long-term span of her life. And I feel like we kind of get a hint of that in their discussions, and I just thought that was really interesting and cool. But yeah, I'm interested in more about like Fawn's, I don't know, both of their ideas and how their creative ideas relate to them as people.
I think you pretty much like hit the nail on the head. Indra's photography was about alienation from herself, and also seeing herself, I think, as ultimately it's open to interpretation, but I think I was coming from a place of like seeing yourself as like a sum of parts that sometimes don't always work or fall apart or decay, and I think when you see like, I think there's like a limb, like a android's limb that's like disassembled a little bit or something. There's like aspects of that. I think also there's like an image of two of the androids embracing, and I think that is also speaking probably to something within the character. Yeah, and then with Fawn, I think for her, like to me, she comes across almost as like much more, I don't want to say like innocent, but like younger almost.
She's naive, yeah.
Like a little naive, and there's a sense of like exploration for her, and so I just was like, like what is the thing that would interest her? And I thought, something organic that's not, there's no aspect of like machinery to it, might be something that she might be interested in. But at the same time, succulents have like sort of like a pattern to them. I think they grow.
Yeah, there's like a mathematical.
There's like a mathematical pattern to it.
Like Fibonacci, like
yeah,
they're like complexities. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. So there's an aspect of that, and I liked for Indra's to be like Indra's motivations when you see her and then you see what she's photographed. I like those motivations. I like that those motivations are like very cloudy, I think. And then when we see Fawn and her show, it's like much, I don't know if like milder is the right word, but it's like a little more straightforward. And I liked the contrast of that, I guess. I found that interesting to kind of like think about. I remember the thing that I forgot, which is also that I got really into a couple of photographers around the time that we were doing this book. One of them is Elsa Bleda. She's a photographer from South Africa. And her photographs are just like surreal and completely beautiful. And they're mostly of places more than people. But they also had like a dreamy quality that I think I was kind of like keeping in mind.
Yeah, there were a lot of her photos embedded in the script when we handed it off to Jen.
Yeah. Just to like convey a sense of like atmosphere, because sometimes that can be hard to communicate, but I found that photographs sometimes really go a long way for that. So yeah. That's awesome. I think that was the thing I forgot.
One other thing that we also haven't touched on, so I'm just going to mention it if you want to bring it up later, is when we were working on this book, one of the things that was also going on in our lives was that I was dealing with a lot of chronic pain.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of one of those issues where it's like, this is it. This is what the rest of my life is going to feel like. I guess I have to just deal with it. And how do I like let the rest of my life grow around this like intractable part of me now? So that was also like a huge part of of the story.
Definitely. I'm glad you remembered that. It's been so long now. It's just like hard to. Yeah.
We should reread this book.
Yeah. No, yeah, that was another really moving part, especially like her visits to the doctor, of like testing out medications, like that all felt like very real. I also like, yeah, like I feel like Indra is not she's not trying to be like antagonistic towards other people or Fawn, but you can just kind of tell that she doesn't feel good, and being in that having chronic pain kind of puts you in like a kind of like a centered, like a, I don't want to say self-centered, but it's like something that's constantly like knocking for your attention, and that changes your personality, like having to deal with that. So I really like that aspect a lot. I thought that was interesting, and that makes sense, like, that you've dealt with it so for like a long time. Like you even did a book like about learning to draw with your non-dominant hand, right? Like
yeah. Yeah, like I completely lucked out where it took almost a decade for that injury to heal, and now I'm okay enough. It was there's like a lot of injuries that happen in my dominant hand, but one of them is a cartilage injury, which it never goes away. Cartilage never heals, but like the stuff that was like bone and soft tissue and tendons and stuff, that takes a really long time to heal. It takes literally years.
Wow.
Don't mess up your dominant hand, guys.
Oh my gosh, wow.
I'm laughing.
He was there the whole time. He gets to laugh.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, that was tough.
Yeah.
It kind of like it. I don't want to speak for you, but like it almost like displaces you from yourself in some ways, right?
Yeah. There were a lot of bad feelings that went into the kernel, like original kernel of this book, from a lot of different places.
Yeah, I hope it was a little cathartic.
It was extremely cathartic.
Good.
Yeah, I think that part of Indra's character is really interesting, and also how it like again influences her art, how it influences her dynamics with people, just really well woven. I think one thing that was interesting is kind of like the reveal of her backstory. I thought that was, for like, as I was reading it, I was like, oh, okay, we're gonna have like dead parents backstory, like that's the driving force of her trauma. I was like, but then it seemed like the main thing that she was grappling with was that she didn't testify against this like AI program that was responsible for the car crash, which I thought was really kind of added a more layered element to that. Not that having, you know, dead parents element as bad or anything, but I just thought that was it compounded it into something very interesting, especially because of AI being people in this world. It was almost like she could have been responsible for like maybe stopping Juan's existence at some point if they had like if she had like gone through with this. So I thought that was really interesting if you wanted to like talk about that narrative choice.
Yeah, I'll briefly say that's one of my least favorite narrative choices that we made, probably. I'm just like, I'm not a big fan of the trope personally, but in this particular case, I think it spoke to enough things in the book, and we're able to get enough like other stuff, I think, as you said, like layered onto it, that I felt like this was a place where, all right, I'll break this rule, because I think that there generally are tropes that we try to avoid, and this is one of them. But I think your read on a lot of it is pretty good. It's interesting that you said that she could have testified against this and then Fawn never would have existed, because that actually didn't occur to me, but that totally makes sense. You know, like I think that's a great reading of the text. I think that there is I gather my thoughts.
So like I feel like this is like one of the things all of the quotes that are in the book, where like you go between scenes and then there's like a bunch of basically headlines on black. all of those are real headlines.
Mhm.
Those
They're paraphrased.
yeah, they're
importantly, but
paraphrased.
but none of that stuff is made up. It's all real.
Yeah. And the thing with like self-driving cars and the traffic cameras, and like it's implied that injury wasn't seen because the technology behind the traffic cameras was so biased that they didn't see specific dark like skin color. Like that was supposed to be like very grounded in the now, especially now. Like there were not self-driving cars on the road when we first wrote this, but now they're happening.
I want to say we pulled back specifically from like explicitly calling out skin color to leave it a little more ambiguous, because the way that this technology works is I think on its face more complex than that. But the algorithms match the thoughts of the people who create them. And so whether it's skin color or some other data that's been fed into it. So this is a story my brother told me as an example to help me understand how like a AI black box works. So DARPA was developing technology to identify tanks on a battlefield, and so they took this AI black box, which is like basically a black box that you feed data into, and you try to teach it to identify a certain thing in the photo consistently, right? So like if you were to feed in like pictures of dogs, it would learn to recognize dogs. In this case, they were trying to get it to identify tanks on a battlefield from all of their satellite imaging and stuff, and they couldn't figure out why it kept spitting out these very particular photos. There were tanks in some, there were not tanks in others, and eventually what they figured out was that what the black box had learned was whether or not it was a cloudy day, so like it was seeing the shadows of clouds on the ground, and that was what it had learned to identify. And so I think that's like a fairly simple example of how, okay, so now let's say you have a team that's building a piece of software, but that team is primarily of one background. And so they're feeding in mostly photos of people from that background. You can see how this technology might completely miss people who don't look like them. And so that's kind of how I understand the technology to work. But I think it in practice is a lot more complex than that. And so I think that's just a sidebar to say that I don't think we explicitly called it out as that, but
it's implied.
But it's implied.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that we massaged that scene so many times so that it is, you see it if you are observant, but it's not explicitly said.
Yeah. The other thing that the parents, that trope, I think, gave me a little bit of room to do was address a character whose main source of culture was through their parents and some of the anxieties around that. There's like a few places here and there where it comes up where she feels like she wishes, there's one scene in particular that I'm remembering where she says, "I wish I was better at this," and she's lighting a diya in like a home, not like a shrine, but like a
shrine.
I guess it's like a home shrine, yeah. It says, "I wish I was better at this," and it was also a way to draw out some of those anxieties of like connection to culture after your parents are gone. And I mostly just put that in there because I wanted to try to really build up the texture of what was going on. So yep, yeah. But I agree. If I could have thought of like a more clever, I don't know, if we had thought of a more clever way to do that, I think we probably almost certainly would have done that. But it goes back to that thing. Wait, no, you guys are this way. No, this way. So, yeah, it goes back to the thing you guys were saying about how like at some point you just gotta hand it off, and that's the end of it. So
yeah. And like, to be clear, I don't think it's badly done. Like, it's just, yeah, I don't know. I think it makes sense in the context of the story. And like recently there is a little like discourse thing about like trauma in writing and how not that it can be shallow, but I think specifically these critics were talking about moments in books, really hyped up books where it was just badly done. And so they were complaining a lot about like how our powers or trauma is performed in narrative spaces and like the sort of like emotional currency you can get out of like delivering that in a narrative. But I think here it's pretty well done. I don't think it's used like to like justify her in any way or like her attitude. Like it's a pretty layered reveal into her backstory. So yeah, I thought it was solid.
I'm glad. I think one of the things that I tried to really, like, I should say we both tried to really do was just make sure that the way that she acted wasn't necessarily connected to that, but more the chronic pain and some of the other things that she deals with on a daily basis. You know? So
Yeah.
I definitely wanted to avoid like the tragic backstory character, even though it's kind of like there, you know.
Yeah.
One of the dystopian modern America things that we kept in that I keep on coming back to every time I flip through the book is that there's like in the future where there's like AI and self-driving cars everywhere, everybody still has to worry about insurance in America.
Yeah.
Talks about like how horrible her premiums are and her doctor's trying to move her into like a generic medication that's like different, and it's like, yeah, this is dystopia.
Yeah. So real, too real.
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to like, you know, the part with Indra's trauma about like her parents, I kind of felt like their rivalry was like, it kind of was more influenced by like their own insecurities about certain things. So I didn't really feel like I was like, oh, she's like this because she has like some, not so much like a dark secret, but like something she doesn't necessarily feel comfortable talking about. But they're kind of like, it kind of informs like how she acts. It's not like a direct, it's not like a causal relation.
Well,
I don't find it to be that way at all.
I'm really glad to hear that. It's like a touchy thing to especially in fiction. I think it can be a touchy thing, but I'm glad to hear that it reads more like a layered thing, I guess.
Yeah, it's they're bringing their own problems to the table and they're projecting them on each other.
Yeah,
I love that.
I also love Fawn's parents.
Yeah.
Yay!
I'm so glad. They
like,
turned out to be our favorites.
They're so my favorite characters. I love Fawn's mom.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm really like Jen really knocked it out of the park with their designs. We kind of gave them some like kind of directions that we wanted to go into. We were looking at a lot of like Urasawa's Pluto, like that kind of like, I don't know, like kind of bulby head, like Inhuman, but like human silhouette. And we're like, okay, so effectively they have the like pretty like generic bodies, and then they have chosen their own like roles and presentations. So this one is mom and this one is dad, and they've decided that.
Yeah, but like I think it comes back to what you said about performance. In this, like even more so than Fawn, like her parents are all performance. You know, like they've chosen mom and dad, but gender is meaningless. You know, in that sense. And I think it even comes across in the way that they're dressed. You know, like there's no. To me, they didn't have a particularly gendered way of dressing. And that was entirely JR's sort of decision making there, and I thought it really like helped to shore up just like how like they're people, but not they're people, but they're like it's a performance.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
We haven't really talked about the art a lot. Like, I'm just probably just gonna compliment it tons. Like, I really love JR's art a lot. I love how they handle both, like, their inking especially. I like how they have a lot of like broken and open lines. Like, that's really appealing to me. It's very like manga-esque. I think that's like a strength that not a lot of like American cartoonists have, because it requires a lot of like restraint, and that's, I feel like that sort of style of inking is not in like the American tradition. So when I see people doing it, it's like, it's very like, oh, I'm like, oh my god, they like left a line open between like the nose and the lip. I was like, oh, that's like,
Yeah.
like
Amazing.
masterclass stuff.
Know that in like an illustration class for not closing my lines. But I find it so appealing.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot in these
Yeah.
illustrations. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, they have like airiness to them, but there's also a lot of heavy black spaces, so it
Mhm.
has a really good balance, I felt.
Yeah, I adore the art in this book.
Yeah.
There's something about the way that Jen drew this in particular where part of me almost wants to even like look at it from like way back here,
Mhm.
because the color blocking, can't point, the color blocking is like so stark
Yeah.
in a way that I find really, really appealing. And it really, to me, it also felt like, I don't know if Jen was thinking about this, but to me, it felt like photography in some ways. Like when I see photography that I like, it tends to be framed in ways that Jen did some of the paneling and stuff.
Yeah, really strong compositions, strong color blocking throughout like the page, but also throughout the scene. You have like a nice gradation of like color as like the scenes progress. That's like, yeah, really good.
Yeah, I thought they did a great job. And I love that the palettes were pretty tight all the way through.
They're really tight. I mean, I think that a lot of that was working with Tess also.
Tess, yeah. Tess was like primarily responsible for the colors, but I think my understanding is that JR may have done some art directing.
Okay.
I think that they were working very closely during the color stages.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's something almost like I want to put it in a glass and drink it kind of.
Yeah.
The colors, like it's really.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. I think the last element I kind of want to talk about that we haven't yet was the hallucinations that Indra has. Yeah, do you want to just talk about making that choice? Like you mentioned earlier that you kind of like added this sort of like horror element as you brought JR on for it. Like maybe that wasn't there before, but I'd be interested to hear how you like integrated that kind of like narrative choice into the story.
Sure. So like internally in the script, the times that this stalking demon appears in like Indra's like subconscious or like in the periphery of her vision, we always call it the Raksha, which is Indian demon, and it's supposed to look kind of like the silhouette of a Raksha, where it's like not entirely correct, but they have these kind of like crown shapes on their heads.
Find it.
Yeah. It is supposed to be kind of like an expression of Indra's chronic pain, where it's like getting bigger and bigger, and then finally it's like her pain is managed, so like, or it's like becoming managed, and it never quite goes away. It's still present, but she's like kind of being able to find a equilibrium with it by the end. Yeah.
It was like, this is like kind of a
this is the first time
shape with the crown.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I was really interested in that because I thought the design was like so specific, but I was like, I'm not quite sure like what, like if this was just like a monster design or if there was something cultural. So it's really cool. That kind of like opens up a whole new like narrative through line for me. That's awesome.
Cool.
I can't find
Yeah,
it. It's fine.
there's like one scene at the end, I think, where you see it clearly. Or it's like towards the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, here it is. And it looks a little less, I think it looks less sort of culturally aligned the more clearly you see it. So more when it's in silhouette to me. Yeah, those parts were actually some of the hardest parts of the book because
Oh my god, we rewrote the scenes so many times.
Yeah, we rewrote them a lot. I wasn't sure about them the longer we went on. Some of the scenes were longer, and we actually ended up cutting them. I think not only for like, so we take a long scene and chop it into like 2 pages or 3 pages. And I think the reason for that was just that I thought maybe they had more punch the less you saw them. It was something to me that I thought said something about Indra's character, but there's an element of like melodrama to them. I think that I still can't decide whether it like does like, I want to say like justice, but like I still am not sure whether it does for the character kind of what I had hoped necessarily. It's like that kind of thing to me is like turning a dial, you know, and I just I think it was a first, especially in like a full story like published thing, and I think I'm still kind of feeling out the dial on that a little bit.
Right.
But I think the scenes still thread into sort of aspects of her backstory, so I find them necessary. But the imagery, the imagery, so imagery I was going back and forth on at the script stage, and when Jen started turning over pages and they were so like scary, you know, I was like, all right, this is cool, you know, let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, originally those scenes were actually pretty gory. There was one version where she's like hiding behind a car that it's on its side from like this giant that's like walking like towards her like over the horizon line. And like there were like so many versions of this.
Yeah. It turned into one of those things where it was like, okay, either we're gonna really get into these and devote a lot of the book to it, or we're gonna pull back on them. And I think ultimately we ended up pulling back on them because the thrust of the story was about the two of them, like Indra and Fawn, and Fawn basically couldn't be present for these scenes so much. And so I think in terms of striking a balance, I think that's where we ended up. Also, it was like JR signed on to draw like 120 page book or something, and then it turned into like 100. I'm counting 170 page book, and you know, if we had added that, I think it would have been another 50 pages, and I'm not doing that. So.
Yeah.
It would have been like I don't know, 15 or 20.
Yeah, I you know,
I think that was a smart choice, just because like, again, it's like you have a lot of like speculative elements already, and like that if you had again like dialed it up, I feel like that probably would have like been like clashing a little bit with like the science fictional aspect. So I think your instincts are right. And like I think for me, my sense of the character, not that it matters, but my read of it was like kind of like especially not knowing like the cultural kind of background around this monster, was that it was like a sort of like golem of like both her grief but also her own like alienation towards like humanity, especially now that she has like her fake eye implant, especially because it felt like that monster would come up around people a lot, or like when she was in a crowd or something. And so it was kind of fun trying to like see kind of like draw a line between the metaphor of that image and then her as a character. And also it's like kind of like naked, so there's also a sense of like eroticism, especially with also in regard to her, like her first photography show where the robots are technically naked as well.
Yeah.
And then I thought that was interesting, you know, at the end we get to have Fawn and Deer kiss, and so I was like, okay, like maybe like there's something there, like, so I was just like, it was just like really fun to like kind of like go back and like braid and come up with my own like, you know, takes on that. But yeah.
So
Cute.
like in the beginning, like it's actually supposed to be, this is a dream for her. This is like she's having a nightmare while she's falling asleep when she's supposed to be manning the table for Fall's show. And then later on, when she gets dropped off in the taxi, this is the first time where she actually sees it while she's waking, and that's supposed to be the time when you know that there's something like actually genuinely wrong, because she's not seeing it while she's asleep. But it also I like that you have theories. I think that's
Yeah.
you're thinking so hard about it.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you were thinking a lot.
I like that you're like, it's a horny demon. Like,
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
But look,
That's important.
we have that track record, so yes.
Yeah.
you're like, that makes sense. This is
Yeah, I'm
this
like
all makes
thinking about
sense.
the authors and full. Okay, maybe there's some foundation
Yeah.
here.
Nailed it.
Yeah, Leslie, do you have any, I don't know, thoughts on the romance, on the monster element? Like,
No, I mean, I really liked it. I feel like sometimes I think sometimes it's hard to write this kind of comic, like that's super character focused, because you do kind of end up in like patterns that you may have seen or like enjoyed in other things, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing, but I think a lot of people talk about it like it is a bad thing. So even though I was like, I think I know where this is going, like I was still surprised by like all the little interactions that the characters had with each other, and you know, all the little side characters I felt were fleshed out in a way that was really enjoyable. Like I feel like they added a lot of good texture to the book. So I think even though I was like, I'm pretty sure they're gonna get together, I was still like, okay, you know, I'm liking like how this is going. Like it's interesting and fun. And I like how bratty Fawn is.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. I loved writing it.
So
I really like writing characters.
you do. Good
Yeah.
job. Originally, when we sold the book, it did not have a romantic conclusion. And it wasn't until we brought on JR that we all had like a big group discussion, and we were like, okay, so this is a romance, right? The main two characters are absolutely in love. And then we had to like all go as a group to the publisher and be like, hey, so what if at the end they kiss? Luckily our editor was like super on board.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was originally, that was not gonna happen.
Yeah, so I'll say that I thought it was a romance. When we were about like 75-80% through the process, I was like, I think to me this is a romance, but I didn't want to be the one to say it, you know. I wanted someone else to come to me and tell me. And so it was pretty
Hey.
it was pretty gratifying when Yuko was like, I think this is a romance, and I was like, you should
You're like,
I was like, you should talk to JR about it, you know.
I like that you're just like writing it as a romance, and you're like, hope everyone gets the hints.
This was one where I tried to write it originally as a friendship, but I think for whatever reason I just romance is fun, you know. It's like fun to read about, it's fun to write about.
Everything that we make is a romance. We can't help ourselves.
Yeah. So that was cool, you know. And then once we decided that, we did like a romance pass. So we went back into the script and we were like, where are moments where we can kind of, because I felt like
Have them checking each other out.
Yeah. So first of all, JR was already doing that without us having had this conversation.
Just natural
was,
inclination.
Yeah, JR's natural inclination, you know.
Yes.
So that was already worked really great. But then it was a question of like, there are some moments, the reason I thought it was a romance originally was there were some moments that I thought had like an electric quality to them here and there. And
The karaoke scene.
karaoke scene. There's the scene in the furniture warehouse. There's
Oh my God.
They
did such a good job. Like they
really got
brought
it.
that je ne sais quoi that was not in the script.
Yeah. Well, okay.
It was in the script a little bit.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, sometimes when you work with someone, like when I work with someone, I try to like give them enough of a ramp that they can run with their interpretation, you know. But I just think that I've read comics where I'm supposed to believe that something is a romance, but the art doesn't sell me on it, right? And I find that to be like the most unsatisfying thing, that when you reach the end and, you know, like the two characters get together, but I don't feel it, you know, because like I don't feel it in their body language. I don't feel it in the way that they've been drawn over the course of the book. So if I know it'll look like it, then I'm more inclined to say, let's go for it, you know?
Right.
So this was a very special case where I wasn't there from the beginning, but it ended up being the case. And yeah, so we went back and we kind of punched up some small scenes here and there just to amp it up a little more.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like, I feel we also don't have a lot of strong romance comics generally in our industry. Like when I do think of romance comics, I do think of like a lot of mostly webtoons, like your webcomic. But yeah, I feel like it's kind of an untapped element, like narrative thing to explore in mainstream comics. So I really like that a lot. And yeah, JR is really good at just like playing that horny power chord.
Yeah.
Like it like really, but like subtly, like just like looks like a held stare.
Yeah,
I was like, oh
yeah,
they're really good at
yes.
that kind of like silent, you know, the silent chemistry.
Yeah.
It's not like super in your face.
Yeah, and the drawing will sometimes be very stark, but it just feels so electric, you know. And there's like JR did it with like 5 lines, and I'm like, I don't know how you. So I love that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, rad, very magical. I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Leslie, do you have any like last questions? Anything that you want to cover that we haven't?
No, I think we've talked about everything I was curious about and more. So
yeah, this was like such a fun book, and I loved hearing all about it from you guys.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having us. This is super fun.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this before, but we like listen to your podcast in the kitchen sometimes.
It's fun.
Yeah, it's great.
Thank you.
Yeah,
do you want to like
fans? First time.
Yeah.
Long time first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to plug yourselves? Like, you have an ongoing comic right now with Barbarous, but yeah, let us know what you're up to. And yeah,
sure. Do you want to go?
Yeah. So I am Yuko Ota, YUKOOTA. You can find me at Aidosaur, AIDOSAUR, on most social media. I'm mostly active on Twitter and Instagram these days. I have accounts other places. You can look through my old Tumblr. Where can people find you?
Oh, I'm Ananth Hirsh, ANANTHHIRSH. You can find me at that Ananth Hirsh at Twitter and Instagram. Most of our comics we post for free online at johnnywonder.com. Our current ongoing is Barbarous, which is basically like a monster romance, but it's like a slow burn. So if you read it for the first time, just be patient. And then Pixels of You is this book. It's coming out
February 8th, 2022.
You can pre-order it at johnnywonder.com/pixels.
Yeah, if you're watching or listening to this after February 8th, you can probably pick it up at most of your local bookstore, your any bookshops.
Yeah.
Online or wherever. I didn't practice this.
It's okay.
Yeah. It's been a while since we had to pitch. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's everything we got, right?
Yeah, I think so. We have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Johnny
Yeah,
Wander.
all that stuff.
Uh,
Ko-fi, Patreon, the same stuff.
Yeah, we got a shop. If you go to johnnywander.com, click
Okay.
on shop. It's right there. Hey, this
You're
is
really-
important.
You really need to.
It's
That's
bread
good.
and
That's
butter,
good.
man.
That's good.
Yeah. I will link
Yeah.
everything in the description below. I'm a real YouTuber
Oh.
now, so I can do that.
Oh, yeah.
So cool.
Cool. Oh yeah, and if you want to look at the pixels, we like hired someone to do a book trailer.
Yeah.
You don't have to watch it, but we thought it was cool, so go watch it. I guess.
Yeah, it's in the Johnny Wonder news post, and you can see it on our Twitter feeds. We like to bump it frequently because it looks really cool. Hey,
It's very cool.
if you have some money to throw around and you have a book coming out, pay somebody to make a book trailer.
Yeah.
It makes me feel like really important.
Yeah.
You're like, I did that. I'll make that.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
if you
It's so
want,
cool.
I can put it in the video. Let me know.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Oh,
Grace
yeah.
the viewers with it.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
I'll send you
we'll
the.
send, yeah.
I'll send you the file.
Sweet. Yes, congrats. It's gonna be
Thank
out in a
you.
few days. It's a beautiful book. You all did
Thank you.
amazing
I'm
work.
so happy you guys did it.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Thank you for coming on. We're huge
Oh.
fans.
Yes.
We love the
Yeah,
book.
thanks for
We're
having
huge
us.
fans.
Leslie, do you want to sign us out?
Yeah, so you can you can find the podcast, or I guess we're just a YouTube show now.
Mm.
But you can find us on Twitter at Salt and Honey Pod. And you can find me, Leslie, at Dairy Free on Instagram and at Leslie Hun on Twitter.
And I'm Sloane on Twitter. Sloanezone.com is my website. And yeah, that is our show. Yes, thank you both so much. This was so fun.
Bye.
Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you for
Yeah.
putting up with my cat jumping on my lap multiple times.